Imagine a situation in which we are so dependent on electronic communication that everyone is in constant contact with everyone else, revealing their innermost thoughts. Individuality no longer exists. No privacy. Everything you are and everything you think is exposed to everyone.
Welcome to episode 16 of The Lockdown. Now, I'm very excited today because we have a special guest on the show, going by the name of Tyler Murphy, who is one of the co-founders for a data removal service called EasyOptOuts. Now, it was another listener, thank you to you, you know who you are, that suggested EasyOptOuts as a service I take a look at. And I thought, as I've already spoken with Lawrence Gentilello from Optory on episode 9, let's get Tyler on the show for a discussion around privacy, how EasyOptOuts works, and a whole heap of other topics. I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's dive into the interview. I hope you enjoy. Tyler, welcome. Thanks for agreeing to coming on the show. It was actually one of my listeners that recommended you guys to me. So here we are, and thanks. Could you just introduce yourself? Tell me a bit about you, EasyOptOuts. How did you get started in all of this?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Ray. So the company, it's just me, Tyler, and my friend, Ben. We're the only two employees. We're the co-founders. So what we do, we help people remove their information from the internet, specifically from publicly accessible people search sites. That's what we focus on. As for how we got started, we started in like mid 2020. So I had quit my job right before COVID started. I was just like ready for a change. And then like there were the lockdowns. It felt like maybe I should try to like work from home. And I got talking to Ben, and we thought it'd be fun to try and work together on something. So like this wasn't an immediate idea. We literally like put together a spreadsheet where we listed out like every business idea we'd ever had. We ranked them on a bunch of different metrics. Like, is this something that people actually want? Is this something we can actually do with just the two of us? Is this something that would actually benefit people? Things like that.
Yeah.
And this idea came out on top. So that's what we pursued. And this idea was actually Ben's. And Ben's like, he's on vacation. He's on a road trip right now, or he might be here, and he'd be able to tell you more about what inspired him. But I can tell you what he was thinking. So basically, he had known for years that his data was on these sites, and I think it upset him a little bit because he didn't own a house. I think that's something that always comes to mind for him. He didn't own a house, but his address was still on all these sites listed as a public record. And his reaction was always like, this is definitely not a public record. Like, I know my landlord isn't sharing this data, and it's not coming from the county level property ownership records. And these sites are selling my data, claiming it's public. And on top of that, they make it really hard to remove it. So he started to remove himself and his family from these sites. And he found quickly, as like I'm sure most listeners here have found if they've tried this, that it's very difficult to remove yourself from these sites. There are like tons and tons of sites that all have different removal processes, and they all have like kind of the same data. And on some of them, if you remove your data, it also removes it from other sites, but you don't know what those relationships are. So you have to remove them all to be careful, things like that. So he found that there are services that do this kind of removal for you, but they seemed kind of too expensive for what they were doing, since it struck him and me as something that could probably be automated fairly easily. So we both have technical backgrounds. I specifically had some experience in my last job with like web scraping and crawling. So when I saw this problem, like, basically we have to fill out a bunch of forms on websites to request removal of data, I thought that would be, not trivial to automate, but like it could certainly be automated, and there's no reason people should be doing this. And I think we could offer a service like this at a lower price that hopefully works as well or better, because our bots can tirelessly search. They won't make mistakes. They can scan thousands of records, and a person doing the same is going to have a lot of trouble. So that was the inspiration. We got started on the initial code in like August of 2020, and by June of 2021, I think we felt good enough about what we had that we opened it up to paying customers. And things were not very reliable at first. Of course, it was a new product. It was like almost like a beta, and there were lots of bugs. Anytime someone submitted a new kind of data that didn't work for whatever reason when we were searching a certain people search site, we'd have to fix it, things like that.
I have to ask, at any point, like the way you're describing this, did you ever think, why did I get myself into this?
No, actually. I felt the whole time like it's all going very well. I guess in the beginning we thought maybe like all the bot detection services and CAPTCHAs are going to be a hurdle we can't get around, and they were all surprisingly easy to bypass. We run into problems, but I don't think we've ever run into problems that hold us up for more than like a week or two. So actually, I feel reassured every time that happens, that we're reaching a point where our bots are basically indistinguishable from people, and I'm only gaining confidence, even though all the bot detection and blocking stuff is becoming more sophisticated.
It's interesting, like the way you're describing it, because one would imagine that these data brokers, they don't have APIs and things like that you can just integrate with. So you have to work, and every site's probably unique. It sounds like for me, that sounds like a huge challenge, but you're making it sound easy.
Well, okay, I won't say it's easy. We've worked on this for almost 4 years now, actually. Yeah, 4 years this month. So there is constant maintenance. The sites are always changing. I mean, and a given site is not always changing. Some sites haven't changed at all in the 4 years we're doing this, but given all the different sites, they're regularly changing stuff, and we have to account for the changes they're making. But we've developed basically a framework for running the browsers, and there are frameworks already. We use Puppeteer, which is a Node.js library for controlling Chrome. It now supports Firefox also, but we're using that to control the browsers. And on top of that, we've built all sorts of things to make sure that everything we do looks just like what a person would do. And given that we have all those things, it's not actually very difficult then to add support for a new site. It takes like a few weeks of testing to make sure the removal processes work, and then like a few days of coding to make sure we've handled all the different ways of searching and removing data properly. So if for example, like Cloudflare, which is one of the big bot detection and blocking services.
Oh, the bane of my life. Yeah, I'm on an always on VPN, so they don't like me.
Oh, no. It's terrible. And actually, reCAPTCHA, this is kind of a tangent, but reCAPTCHA, they have a hidden type of CAPTCHA where they just detect things about your browser in the background and they give a bot score. Some of these sites, they actually have set up their bot blocking so strictly that they'll block almost anybody using a VPN, no matter whether you're using a totally real browser and you're a totally real person moving a real mouse and using a real keyboard. So on some of these sites, there's almost no way you can do it unless you like get lucky with an IP address that has a good enough reputation.
That's actually something also that bothers me, because I was literally just switching VPN providers yesterday. I've been using Proton VPN for a long time, and I can't remember what site it was now, but I just kept hitting brick walls, captures and repeated, click on the motorcycle. I'm doing that. And then the traffic lights, you know what I mean? And I thought, okay, this is driving me nuts. There's a market out there, and I think there is actually a market out there for residential IPs and proxies, but they're less than legitimate. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's a real pain. They just don't like me because I'm using VPN and Firefox. That's obviously a bad browser in some minds too. They don't like it.
That is a bad signal. You definitely get fewer captures if you're using Chrome, in our experience.
It's a bad state. I have to quickly ask, I'd love your take on this. Is it just too late. I've seen a few comments actually on social media and some emails about this. With all the data breaches out there, are we simply screwed? What do you say to people that think, I'll just give up on privacy? It's too late anyway.
Yeah, well, I feel funny about this. So I think they're right in a way. Like, any data that's been leaked already is out there. You're never going to pull it back. There's no way to pull it back. And I think people often have this feeling like, oh, a data breach just happened. What can I do to fix it? And the answer is there's nothing you can do to fix that data breach that just happened. And I think maybe when you hear people giving up, they're responding to that. And it doesn't mean there's nothing you can do, but it is realistic. I think what it means, though, is what it means for the future is not great. Like, I think people, so like, say a data breach happens and you move, you have a new address to protect, and you should do your best to protect it. And protecting it is difficult, but it's probably worthwhile. Another weird thing about this that I always feel when all this happens is that all of this sensitive data is considered sensitive because it's used by organizations for verifying our identities. So if it's no longer actually useful for verifying our identities, these organizations are going to have to find new, more invasive, or maybe there's some creative, non-invasive thing they can do. But I think it's trending toward requiring new, more invasive ways of verifying our identity when some organization has a need to verify our identity. So I think that's one of the outcomes here, and that's definitely a bad thing. I think some of the new ways of verifying our identities are already kind of obsolete almost. Like, when I call my bank now, they say, do you want to opt into voice identification? We can record your voice and use it to identify you. And it's like, anyone who listens to this podcast can hear my voice. They can use one of these new open source voice cloning things to clone my voice, and they can probably fool my bank.
So for sure. I've actually tested that with my bank, and I fooled it. Yeah, it was my voice, but it worked. Really? It was trivial. It didn't take 5 minutes to just take a snippet of my voice, clone it, and I was in. So what can you do?
Yeah, so I don't really know where we're headed with this. Like, it might end up that we use like digital IDs given to us by the government, where it's all like cryptographically signed, and that's how you prove your identity. But I mean, privacy conscious people don't like that for obvious reasons. I think even the general population doesn't like that, because there's like this general suspicion of government involvement. So I don't think that's an ideal solution either.
I think what's not helped as well, you've heard about this know your customer rules, especially in banking. I use privacy.com for payments. They still have to operate within guidelines and frameworks. There's regulations. In the financial industry, they can't not know who I am. So they need to have my real identity. And that's fine if I can limit that. But I think that's now sort of spread. So I'll give you an example. In the UK, where I'm from originally, as you can tell from my accent, I have a UK number on my pseudo. I use virtual numbers. Now there's this new thing where I've got to provide my identity to keep that UK number, which I'm not going to do. I'm not giving them my ID. And it's a similar thing. It's like, we've got to know who you are, and it's being pushed by the government and these regulators. But I think that's it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because now, as you said, they're using things like the social security number, and how are they identifying us? And at the end of the day, they're storing that, and it's going to be in a breach.
Yep. And like, I know some of them claim they don't even store it, but I don't know if we can really believe that, especially when there are all these third parties involved that data may have been shared with along the way. But yeah, all of that information is going to be breached. I think it's basically inevitable. And I don't actually know what we're going to end up with for identity verification. And another thing this makes me think of is that we're reaching a point where bots are so good at acting human that they can fool any behavioral checks, basically. And that means that any organization trying to verify humans versus bots needs to do something really invasive if they want to distinguish humans from bots. And it means that all of the platforms online where you think you're interacting with humans, like, pretty soon we're not going to know if we're interacting with humans or bots unless some kind of, hopefully not invasive, but probably invasive verification happens. And I don't like that future. And I'm no expert on this. I know there are people working on ways to verify identity anonymously, but I don't know how those things are going.
I think it's going to be a mix of good and bad. So something that came up, I was looking at a tech law video recently. Henry on tech law actually mentioned you guys as well, and said that he looked at your webpage and he couldn't find anything about you, your team, or anything like that. And obviously, this is great. You're on here now, so this is official. This is coming directly from you. Was that intentional? Because obviously, you care about privacy, so I'm assuming that's why.
Yes, that is intentional. And along the way, people have often said, "Who are you? I want to know more about you." And our answer is always, "Well, I'll tell you a tiny bit. Like I'll tell you where I'm from and my background, and I'll also point out that, of course, I care about my privacy given this business. And even if I'd made all of this up, you wouldn't have any way of knowing. Like if I wanted to put something out on the website and put up a picture and make up some background and work history, I could. And if I had bad intentions, I would, because
and so many sites do that.
Yeah.
I see it all the time. The fake profile pictures of their team. It's more prolific than people think.
Yeah, and people search sites especially do that. They always have fake pictures like that. Krebs on Security did a great deep dive into Ray Doris, and they had lots of information about all the fake people involved.
So I like your transparency, and you've already told us quite a lot already. I think going back to the listeners of this show, I've got a real mix. Some are certainly going very deep with privacy, but I get a lot of emails from people just getting started. And I think you talked about data breaches, having what seems like a notable data breach every single week, perhaps every day at this point, is part of the reason. We had the National Public Data Breach, 2.5 billion or more than that records. There's many others. Do you see a pattern in the last 4 years? Are you seeing a pattern here, like where these big data breaches happen? Are people then signing up for EasyOptOuts? Is there any correlation there?
I think very little. When something like this happens, I think we get questions from our existing customers and we get a few more signups, but it doesn't really seem to inspire very much of that.
Got it.
I think the kind of people who pay attention to those data breaches in the first place are the only ones who care enough to pay for something like what we offer.
Sure. Yeah.
So they're already aware, or they don't care about a data breach because they're happening all the time and they don't care about a service like ours.
Do you advertise, or is this purely word of mouth?
We do advertise a little bit. I think it's more so that it was more to get familiar with it. We barely advertise, and we should probably advertise more. We want to in the future because we do want to reach more people. I feel like we're at the point where the automations we have are reliable enough that we can finally handle a lot more customers, and we want to reach people who are maybe using services that cost more than they would like so that we can help them save money. But that's for the future.
So you're probably one of, if not the cheapest out there that I've found anyway. What is it? It's just under $20 a year?
Yeah, it's $19.99 a year, and I think it is the cheapest that we know of. And from what we've seen, like based on our own data, it seems to work better than most of the services and as well as the best, basically.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't know if this is true or not, but are you the only ones that are fully automated? Because it seems like anyone else I've looked into, they have contractors and folks from other countries, to basically process all these opt-outs, the Philippines and India and places like that. What's your take on that?
I'm not sure. So I'm not aware of any others that are fully automated, but there are lots out there, and I don't know how they all operate. I do know that many of the existing big ones do publicly acknowledge that they use people in other countries to process the opt-outs. And I will point out, we're not 100% automated either. There are the two of us, and anytime something goes wrong, like someone submits a name with like a new diacritic accent on one of the letters and it breaks the site, we have to go look at that and fix it. So it can't ever be totally hands off, but we're going to keep it like this, where it's just the two of us who can access the data. Because we want to keep this simple, partly, but also we see involving lots of people like that as a pretty big security risk, because most security breaches start with people who were attacked with some kind of social engineering.
Yeah, 100%. Well, there was the what was it, the Snowflake situation where Ticketmaster, Santander, and I'm sure there's numerous other problems. But I believe what I read into that, there was developers working from home on their own machines. They've got malware, however they got that, clicking a link, being phished, downloading something bad. It's their personal machine, and they're logged into these Snowflake accounts, and it's just happening all the time. So let's go back to my listeners, the ones that are getting started with privacy. Let's say to those listening now, and they're going to get started with EasyOptOuts, they click sign up. What's the process? What information would you require from me to get signed up?
Yeah, so first I will say anyone who's curious can go look at the sign up form on our website. If you go to our website and click sign up, you can go through the sign up form before you submit any data to us and before you have to pay us.
Oh, nice.
But basically we need and we do that because we want people to be able to see what we're asking for before they give us any money. Like we really don't want any unhappy customers, partly because that keeps things much simpler for us, but also because we really want to make people happy. So basically we need people's contact email addresses, and we ask for that first. That's the only way we ever contact anybody. Then we ask for someone's legal name, because even if someone doesn't go by their legal name, a lot of their records will show up under their legal name. And that's because a lot of the data that's out there is shared by the government, which is terrible, but it means that it will include your legal name even if you don't use it. And then we ask for other names you go by. So if you had like a past last name because you got married and changed it, or if you have nicknames or anything like that, you can put those in. We'll search for all of them. We ask for where you live right now and where you have lived in the past. We search for all of those addresses. We ask for the year you were born. And that's not something we put into searches in almost any place, but the year you were born helps us distinguish between different people on the sites who might have the same name and live in the same city.
I was going to ask about that, because let's say John Smith, that'd be a common name. How does it work if then you suddenly have 58 John Smiths in that city listed?
Yeah. So on these sites, obviously at $20, we're not paying these sites for reports on people. We can't afford to do it because a single report costs more than $20 a lot of the time. We scan the free results that they display, and those usually have someone's name, any alternate names they use, their current city and their past cities, and then also the names of their relatives. So we do searches that could return like 100 John Smiths in a big city. And then we scan the list of results and we find the correct ones by ruling people in or out based on the cities that are in there and the list of relatives and the age. So, and that's something we try to do. We try to minimize the amount of data we enter in searches. We err on the side of scanning large lists of results rather than putting data in when we do searches, because we don't know for sure what the data brokers are doing with the search data. Like, there's pretty good evidence that they're actually like trawling for more data when you do searches, and they're trying to build out people's profiles. I'm sure people have seen, if you do a search on some of these sites, they'll say like, did John Smith ever live in Cincinnati or whatever? And you can say yes or no. And I think they're trying to determine like, is there a John Smith in Cincinnati, and should we be updating this John Smith's profile to say they lived in Cincinnati?
Maybe a good opportunity for misinformation then when that comes up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So anytime we have the chance to, we put in fake information because we don't want to be sharing real stuff with them if we can get away with it. But let me get back to what we ask for. Yeah. Sorry. So we get the addresses, current and past. We ask for your birth year. We ask for your email addresses. And at that point, those are the ones we're going to search for, separate from your contact email address. We ask for your phone numbers. Those are used for searches on just a few sites, but there are some sites that let you search by phone number. And then we ask for the list of relatives. And the relatives, we don't search for them, but we use them to distinguish between people. And I think that's about it.
Okay, so you get to the end of that process, and then obviously the final step, I'm guessing, is payment.
Yep, the
What
final step is payment.
what payment options do you take, and what payment processor do you use?
Yeah, our payment processor is PayPal.
Okay.
And I know people who are very privacy conscious are not very happy with that. But we don't want to handle any payment information ourselves, because we'd have to be PCI compliant. It's another, makes us a bigger target, and it's another thing we have to worry about losing if there's ever a data breach.
Oh, for sure.
So PayPal accepts, you can pay with a PayPal account. You can also pay with a credit or debit card.
Okay, and then how all this information you're putting in, how do you store that? I'm now in the mindset of the deep privacy enthusiast. Now they're thinking, okay, is it in some Elasticsearch database? It's going to end up being leaked. I'm sure it's not, but what can you say to that?
Yeah, so we store everything in a managed database on Google Cloud. And again, Google, people don't like to hear Google. So I'll explain that. The reason we use Google Cloud, first, the reason we use any cloud provider at all is because we're just two software developers. We're not like IT experts. We don't know how to set up firewalls. We're not like experts in networking and all those things. So we want to use a managed solution where all of those things that we're not like world-class experts in are handled by the world-class experts employed by the cloud provider. It also makes us more productive because we can just like click a button to make a database. But the reason we use Google Cloud is because it seems like Google Cloud is focused more on making a good platform for software developers than any of the other cloud platforms. The other ones seem to be aimed at companies with IT departments where the IT department previously managed things locally, and now they're like moving to the cloud, and it's all the tools and security defaults and settings are set up for someone with that kind of experience. Whereas Google Cloud is made for developers who worked at Google who just want to get an application going. So it means the security defaults are better. Like, Amazon has had all sorts of AWS has had all sorts of problems with like misconfigured storage buckets, things like that. Like the defaults for those things are just better on Google Cloud. And that means we are sending money to Google when somebody pays us, but we think there's an okay trade-off between the extra security we get by using Google Cloud. Basically, we're protecting ourselves from ourselves and our customers from ourselves a little bit extra that way. So we use a managed database that requires multi-factor authentication. That's a nice thing that Google Cloud makes easy that the other cloud providers don't. If anyone wants to connect to the database from outside of Google's networks, like if we need to troubleshoot something, we can't get into it without our password and a multi-factor code.
That's good.
And then, so like, of course, everything's encrypted except when we're using it to do the opt-outs. It must be used in plain text when we go and enter it on the websites where we're going to search for people and submit the opt-out requests. I think the biggest security hole we worry about is the people search sites, actually. We have to trust that they're going to use the information we put into them appropriately. So like I said, that's why we minimize what we search for. We use made-up information wherever we can. But on top of that, it also means we have to be careful about which sites we actually support, because if there's a site that looks suspicious or looks like it's so tiny that the benefit of searching for somebody on it is outweighed by the risk that they have a data breach in the future that leaks all the searches that have ever been done, or that leaks all the opt-out requests that have ever been made, then we don't want to support sites like that. So I know there's this pressure to support every site we can, but we do have to be a little bit more cautious than that, since there are all sorts of little weird sites that almost nobody's ever actually even going to find if they look for you.
Yeah, and that's actually an important point, because there are the smaller sites that maybe are less than important, but also who's behind these sites. I don't know how much you've looked into this, but I did some digging into a few of them, and it was actually quite shocking. One guy, actually mentioned this on a previous episode, he was prosecuted in New York because of this app he developed for Android. This was years ago, to spy on your partner. So if you suspect your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever is cheating, this was literally spyware that you could download. It would take screenshots of the phone, key logging, and he was then collecting all of that. So he got prosecuted. Yeah, it was nuts. And then he moved to Florida and started one of these people search sites. So I'm sure many of the folks behind these sites, their intentions, they're not legitimate. They're unscrupulous in people in the first place.
Absolutely. So something I find kind of funny is that you'll never find the people running these people search sites on the people search sites, even though, of course, but all the people search sites have all this marketing that's like, we're good for the world. We help protect you from predators and help you protect your kids from predators and help you find old friends. But like, if they really believed that stuff, then they would put themselves on these. And it's a terrible double standard.
Oh, for sure. So here's a question. Just going back to some of the opt-out processes of these sites. There's captures and things, but they're also, so many of them say become a member, pay for this. You can manage your profile and remove the data. I think that should be illegal in the first place. But is that an obstacle for you as well? Like how? 'Cause some of them are very difficult, even to manually opt out of. You follow their process. It says send us the actual profile link, but you can't get the profile link unless you pay. Those type of situations. How do you handle that?
We haven't actually run into much of that. There are cases where, like, okay, for example, there's a site, I don't remember which one. It says when you get to the end of the opt-out process, you've already chosen which data you're trying to remove. They say, okay, now send us your driver's license, and you can tell them whether you want to like mail them a copy or email them a copy or fax them a copy. And it turns out if you say I'm going to fax it to you, they just ignore that and they remove your data immediately anyway. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that. And the kind of thing you're talking about, where they make it hard to find links, but not impossible, where we can actually do a lot of removals that look like they might be impossible or are difficult. And that's part of the beauty of having bots do it all. Like, we can figure it out once and then the bots just do it that way every time correctly.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Okay, so let's move on to manual removals. I saw an article, you may have seen the same one. There was, I think it was on Ars Technica, there was a consumer report study, and the title was, "It's not worth paying to be removed from people finder sites." What I found interesting in the comments of that article, a lot of people misunderstood that in thinking it's not worth paying the data brokers, these people search sites to remove. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with this study, but for me, manual removal, it doesn't have to mean aimlessly just Googling and trying to search for myself. I think Michael Pizzell, Intel Techniques, he already shares a really good data removal guide that's free. And I think my take is do both. I don't think we can do one or the other. And also it's incredibly, I spend days and days, a month in some cases, and take days off just to go through it. And for me, I'm doing that for the first time in many cases on these sites, but obviously it's not your first time. You've done this for 4 years. So some of the obstacles I'm hitting, you've already worked around. Would that be fair?
Oh yeah, that's certainly fair. I think that is a lot of what has made what we're doing possible. So first of all, I do want to say, yes, the Intel Techniques workbook is a really great resource. I always recommend that people use that if they want to go through that themselves. I actually find that, so we get customers, most of them care about this stuff already. The ones who have tried to do this themselves are, I think they're more appreciative of what we're doing, and I don't want to say like we have easy and difficult customers, but like if we get an email from somebody who's tried this themselves and they're saying, "Oh, can you remove me from this site?" They're way more likely to have this attitude of like, "Oh, I know it's probably not possible. I'm really appreciative of whatever you can do for me." Whereas someone who finds our service blind, having never tried to remove themselves manually, it's like, "Oh yeah, just do your thing and make my data go away." And they don't realize it's not that straightforward. So my thoughts about the Consumer Reports study. First of all, I feel like the feedback about it, it's really easy to say negative critical things, and obviously I'm biased too because the study made us look very good, I think, even though the headline may have been
Well, you came out
kind of
top, didn't you, on that study?
but,
Aside from manual removal, I think.
well, no, Optory was very good too. Optory did just as well within the margin of error. I think like manual was 70%, Optory was 68%, we were 65%.
Okay.
The sample size was 4. But I do want to say, I'm glad Consumer Reports did this. Testing these things is very difficult. Like, we have to test how removals go on a site anytime we want to add support for a new one. And to test it for even a few people is a huge pain because, like, it's hard to tell if records go away. You don't know how quickly they're going to go away. You don't know if follow-up emails with their customer service are necessary, things like that. So this study was not perfect, but it's by far the best thing that's out there. So it's a good start. I think more research into these things would be great. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. I think having some external validation for it is nice. Now, what I would have liked to see differently, I think including more services would be great. More and more keep showing up all the time. And I think that's a good thing because it means that there are more resources dedicated to solving this problem and more pressure on the data brokers and more choices for people is great. I think seeing Incogni tested specifically would have been great just because they're marketing so much lately. And I know a lot of people are wondering how well it really works. I know in the past there's been mixed feedback about how Incogni works, but I don't know if it's up to date or not. One nice thing about this study, so they tested 13 sites, and this was nice data for us that we didn't have. So of the 13 sites they tested, we only covered 11 of them at the time of their test. And ideally, we'd cover all of them. Like, we should cover every site we can, but we don't cover every site. We never will. Given that we covered 11 of the 13 sites, it means for the sites that we do cover, our automated removals actually work better than manual removals, probably, because we didn't even try on 2 of the 13 sites. So that's nice to see.
I've got so many questions about that. So first one, when some of the sites want an email address, to opt out, what do you give for that? Do you give them some random one, or are you giving them my email address that I've given you?
No, we don't give them our customers' email addresses. Well, we do sometimes if they need to know which ones need to be suppressed, but we don't ever give them our customer email addresses for communication. We make up our own email addresses in a variety of ways. And there are a couple sites maybe just one site that uses phone numbers for communication or for verification, and we make up contact phone numbers for that too. So we're not giving out our customers.
Okay, that's good. And can you share, like you've alluded to this a bit, but can you share any data broker sites that you just can't remove people's data from, that perhaps you would recommend that just go and do that one manually? Are there any that spring to mind that you could share today?
Yeah, of course. So we have a huge list of ones we'd like to support. The biggest, most prominent one, and we actually tell people about this when we send a summary of what we did, is People Connect. People Connect runs Intellius and Truthfinder and a variety of other sites. And a year or two ago, they changed their opt-out process so that you can't just tell them which data you'd like to remove. You have to find the data you'd like to remove and then have them send you a code via your personal email address or phone number. And it has to be an email address or phone number that they have on file for you already. And then once you get that code, you can remove the data. So we're not receiving codes we can't receive a code in our customer's personal email or phone on their behalf. So we don't cover that site anymore. We are working on ways to cover it. So of course, People Connect doesn't have perfect data about everybody, which means they have to have a process to support removals for people who have a new phone number or a new email address, or where the data is just wrong in People's Connect system, which means they do process these removals via customer service emails or phone calls. So we're actually working on automating those customer service emails. And in our the testing we've done so far, which is fairly limited, it looks very promising. And I think we're going to be able to have our bots have convincing enough conversations with their customer service that we can do the removals that way.
So is this AI? Is this where you're going here?
So we've tried that. And short answer, no.
Okay.
Basically, what we've settled on is maybe like the dumbest kind of AI, if you want to call it AI. It's not AI, but we basically do like really complicated Mad Libs type thing. If everyone knows what Mad Libs is, you like fill in the blank for different words, and we're putting different sentences together in different ways. And there are like huge possibilities of how many ways we can say something to them. But that works better than using language models. We've had trouble getting the language models to talk in a way that sounds human and has enough variety. And I think on top of that, we don't want to use any privately hosted language models because there are privacy issues there. And running a language model locally, the local ones just aren't quite as good yet, and they use enormous resources. It's not really worth it. It doesn't really fit into our budget for providing these.
Well, it gets expensive, doesn't it? If you want it to respond with any decent speed, then that's quite an investment in hardware, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to say, so People Connect's the one I want to call out. There are lots and lots more sites that we don't cover and we would like to cover. We have a backlog of like at least 50 of them, and we prioritize which ones we work on based on like how prominently they come up in search results in search engines, and how often people email us to say, I found my data here, I'd like it removed.
How often are these sites repopulating data? Because one of the bits of advice I give people is, take some other measures as well to stop the repopulation. So, for example, put your title of your house, your home, in a living trust. Don't put your real name in the living trust. I've had issues with that in the past. That's another conversation. But are you finding that you do the removal 6 months later that it's back again? Because they're just scraping those public data or public records.
Yeah, so I think it depends a lot on how the person trying to remove their data operates in the first place. Like if they're careful about what they do and they're not moving around or sharing their data with new businesses that are going to share it in new ways, then I think stuff showing up again is pretty rare. And it also depends a lot on the data broker or people search site. Some of them are good about maintaining suppressions and some of them aren't. And actually, it comes down partly to what we do. So in some places, when you request removal of your data, you can ask them to delete your data, or you can ask them to suppress and stop sharing and selling your data. If we have a choice between those two, we usually ask them to suppress it rather than to delete it. And there's a trade-off here. Obviously, deleting would be better, but if they delete all of your data and don't maintain any records of the fact that it should be suppressed, then anytime they re-import new data from their data sources, they just show your data again. Whereas
that's my concern. Yeah,
ask them to suppress it, it can maintain that suppression information, and when they re-import new data, your data remains suppressed. So I think, anecdotally, like for my data, which runs through our systems, I think when we do a new scan every 4 months, I usually don't show up on more than a few sites. It's pretty normal for me to show up on 0 sites since the last check 4 months ago. And I think once someone has been in our systems for like a year or more and things have like really gotten suppressed and like all the data sharing that goes on in the background between the big data brokers has slowed down, I think that's pretty normal. I think in someone's second round of removals, 4 months after their first round, it's pretty normal to see like 20 or 30 records where for whatever reason, we don't know, we're trying to figure these things out. It just didn't work the first time, or it needs a second try.
Interesting. And so as a user of your service, would I get 4 months later, when that next scan happens, how do I get informed? Do I get an email, or do I have do I need to log in? Is there like a dashboard or something?
So there's no dashboard. People would like one, but we just send an email that lists where people were found. And I do want to comment on that, actually. So Some other services, so Optory especially, they give you screenshots of where your data was found. And I know some of our customers would like that. The reason we don't do that is because we don't try to verify anybody's identity when they sign up, because we don't want to have the information necessary to do that. But if we don't verify that, it means someone can sign up and enter someone else's information. And if we were to give screenshots of the data we found, or information about what information about which personal information was found specifically, then our service could be abused as a really powerful people search engine. Like,
good OSINT tool.
A combination of every single, a great OSINT tool. And I think like a service like Optory's can be used this way if they're not verifying people's identities. And I'm not saying it can be. I don't know if they verify identities. I'm not up to speed on that. But that's what we worry about and why we don't share more than that. We just show people which sites they were found on.
Interesting. Okay, so you've got, I'd say, somewhat of an inside view of these data brokers, more than I have. Can you share any privacy techniques that you adopt, or Ben, personally? Do you use VPN? Do you use alias names, virtual numbers, anything?
Yeah. So I can only say a little bit about Ben. He does use a VPN all the time, I'm pretty sure. I use a VPN only sometimes, and that's because I'm just so annoyed by all the CAPTCHAs and bot blocks I get if I use one more often. So I use one when I feel like it's something sensitive enough for it to matter. Something I'm very grateful for is that I have a really common name. My parents did a good thing for me, and even if someone knows my full name, and even if they know the city I live in, it's not enough to narrow it down to me. Usually they have to know significantly more about me. So that's not something everybody can do, but if people are really worried about it, they can start to go by a more common name, and that would definitely help. So I also fake everything I can if I ever have to share data. Like, I think it's easy to think, I'll just avoid giving out data. But I think almost any opportunity you have, if it's legal to give out fake information, that's even better than declining to give information. Like, if you're at a new store and they say, do you want to join our rewards program? Like, say sure, and give them like a made up name and phone number. And then when they sell it, it's better for you.
I got a story with that though. So I use alias names as well. And the local pizza place, I was ordering online to get a pizza delivered, and then I started going in there in person. And this isn't the name, but let's say it's John. They say, "Oh, hey John, how are you doing?" And it's so embarrassing, especially when I'm with a friend, because they say, "Who's John?" They're looking at me funny, like they give me this side eye look, and then I have to explain. So coffee shops is another one. There was a loyalty program. I was always in this coffee shop. It's an independent one in a local town. So great coffee, great people, and I signed up for their loyalty program, and obviously in an alias name. That became challenging when I was going in with friends and colleagues.
No, yeah, that's great. I've even told the people I'm going to give them made up information, and I tell them why. Nobody cares.
No, they're just doing their job. They just give us a name. They don't care.
Yeah. So another thing I do, I've been buying from Amazon, for example, for like my whole life almost.
Yeah.
Amazon is a huge company. It has all my data. I don't think that's ideal. I think a lot of people try to avoid that, but I sort of accept the idea that since they already have all my data, I stick to them, I stick to retailers I know have all my data already, because I think it's, for me at least, too inconvenient to like go to the trouble of making sure that anyone shipping me a package that I buy online doesn't get my real address. And I know there are address forwarding services. I don't use them, but I avoid exposing my data in new places anytime I do have to give out real data. And I guess it's similar. I just try to consume less. I feel like it seems like anytime I am buying something or getting something, there's almost always like a trade of data involved. And it helps me to remember that is the case. And it helps me avoid things that I don't really need, or like question whether they're worth it. And I feel like that's better for me in lots of ways.
Yeah, that's great. I do use an alias with Amazon as well, only because, and you really, even if you just do it on the delivery address, I think this still has a positive side effect, because with some third-party sellers, they do share that name and shipping address with them, and I don't know
Yeah,
what they're doing with it. So that's one of the reasons I do that. But
that's a
Amazon,
great
they
point.
know who I am by now. I'm sure.
Yeah. So also, I do avoid sharing my face online. Um, I think at this point I've given up on the idea that my voice is still private. Like anytime I call in for customer service anywhere, they tell me the call is being recorded. I'm sure some of those have been leaked already, but I think at this point, and hopefully for the next few years at least, I still know what I look like, and no scammer who's going to try and impersonate me can use that. And
Yeah,
then I think a big thing is making sure my friends and family know that they shouldn't be sharing my info, because like even if I do all the best things I can, if someone is like got some sophisticated targeted scam and they're coming for me, uh, my security is useless if my friends and family give out my information, because like they all know who I am and my real phone number and where I live and things like that. And I will say the reason I act this way and don't do more or less is because the main thing I worry about is a sophisticated, well targeted scam that like ruins me in one way or another.
yeah,
I think I've accepted that there's always going to be this background of incessant, low effort, like broadly sent spam, and that's just too late for that. And I think I've also kind of accepted that somebody really motivated with large enough resources can impersonate me well enough that I'm just not even going to worry about it, even though maybe I should. And I'm trying to stop those middle ground things from happening, where it's like they're going to steal my retirement money or something like that.
yeah. No, I think you're doing the right thing, and it is a balance. You can't, like you said with Amazon, you can't be 100% off the grid, private. Perhaps you can, but it's that the individuals that can do that probably don't have families and busy lives and normal lives. It's you got to strike a balance, which is why I say to people, just don't give up, do something, and just do it in small steps.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
something I found a while ago, and I don't know if you're aware of this. So I was going through manually removing my data from all these brokers, and I thought I'd done a great job. And I was bragging to a colleague. I actually worked at AWS at the time, funnily enough, and he said, "Oh, I'll find you." And I was like, "No, he's not going to find me." And within 2 minutes, on his phone, he said, "Is this you?" And it was. I
Mhm.
said, "What's that?" And it was a hunting app. He was a hunter. He went hunting. And if you install iPhone, Android, they have these apps: OnX Hunt, HuntWise, HuntStan. There are dozens of them. They're basically data brokers. They're for hunters that they may be on someone's land and they need to find out who the owner is. So they're doing something very similar, but just targeting it at a different audience. Have you come across those at all? Were you aware of that?
Yeah, so we've come across those kinds of things a little bit. We know that they exist. We know that it would be good to remove people from them. We haven't really dedicated anything to figuring that out at this point, and we probably should. What we focus on is like the stuff that somebody finds if they search for themselves on Google, because it seems like that's what most of our customers are interested in. They want to discourage a casual searcher, and that's as far as we've gotten at this point.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, listen, I'm going to ask one more question, and then anything else you want to share. Any
Oh yeah.
future plans? Any plans to offer different tiers or packages, or do you just want to keep it the way it is for now? What's the future of EasyOptOuts?
Yeah. So it's all motivated by what most of our customers want. So that's like they want to look themselves up and find nothing. I think most of them want something where they sign up once and they never look at it again.
Mm,
So that means like even though some people want a fancy dashboard or more insight into what's happening or more control over what's happening, I don't think we're too likely to offer those things in the near future. Um, And people also want to be able to trust that we're not going to misuse any of their data. So that also means, like, even if we start marketing, which we would like to do, we're not going to like share any marketing data with marketing partners, anything like that. So as for like positive features that people want family plans so that they can manage groups of people. People want business plans so they can manage groups of employees. We're going to formalize those things and offer them in a self-service way. Because like the whole time we've had businesses coming to us saying, I want your service. We don't even mention that on our website. We didn't for years.
That's interesting.
And we figured out ways to do it, but we need to streamline that.
Well, it's interesting that businesses are approaching you because, I up until recently, I just thought this was purely a individual consumer thing. But if businesses are approaching you, that's good. They're thinking of their employees.
It's great for us. And like, we think it's a great opportunity. And we think basically the way we see it, business solutions for this have already existed for a long time, but there's a huge new market of businesses with lots of employees who would not get signed up for like $100 a year or $1,000 a year service. But when the service is $20 a year, it makes sense to marginally cut the risk that someone is subjected to phishing. So that's what we're after.
Who, from a business side, I'm just curious, who approaches you? Is it like the security team? Is it another part of the business? Or is it smaller businesses? You get a mix of that?
It's been a mix. At the larger businesses, it usually is somebody in charge of IT or security.
Yeah.
And at the smaller ones, it's usually whoever runs the company, because it's like 30 people and there's no one responsible for security.
Sure.
Other stuff. So I mentioned People Connect. That is like the top priority in terms of additional sites we cover. We're actively working on that. We'd like to support People Connect again as soon as possible. We want to keep going through our backlog of 50 new sites, however many there are that we need to work on. We want to leave the business as just the two of us. I mean, we might bring somebody on in the future to help with customer service or marketing, but like in terms of the core, we don't want to complicate this. We're pretty happy working. Like we're best friends. We take things pretty easy, and we're not trying to turn this into some empire thing.
It's a model that works.
It works for us, but that means we have to keep improving reliability. And that does come at the expense of new sites. We have to weigh avoiding manual fixes against developing support for new sites, but improving reliability is going to continue. It must. So we found sometimes that we can find people by searching for them in search engines. Like we do a Google search for somebody. That has sometimes been useful for telling us about new sites we should be supporting. I think we want to try to automate that for everybody so that we search for them in search engines and see if there's more stuff we should be covering. A thing that comes up often, people like to, a lot of people, the only way they check if our service is working is by Googling themselves after our service has run. So they'll Google themselves, and after our service has run, they'll see some results, and they'll send us a screenshot and say, my data is still in Google. And that's usually just because Google has cached old versions of the pages that person is no longer on. So I think automating, you can request that Google expedites an update of the page that was cached. So we'd like to automate those requests so that people are happier when they Google themselves, basically.
That's interesting.
Something we thought about for a while. I'm just going to keep listing things that come to mind, but please stop me.
This is good. Keep it coming.
Yeah. So we thought maybe we should publish a few removal guides. So like every service like ours publishes a bunch of removal guides. And I think it's because it's good marketing. It helps people find you in a search engine. We haven't done that because, I mean, we're doing pretty well from word of mouth. But we want to publish some guides that are like how to really remove yourself from whatever site, because there are a few sites where our automation is doing something that no public guide mentions anywhere, because we found that there are like certain extra kinds of searches you have to do or extra emails you have to send to actually remove your data. And I think publishing guides for those few things where we actually have something unique to say would be helpful.
You don't want to give away your secret source, though, I guess, from two reasons. Other removal services, but the actual data broker themselves think, oh, hang on, we better fix that. And
oh, well, we don't really want to keep any of this a secret. Like, we want everybody to be able to do this. It's more like when we decide today, like, what am I going to work on? Am I going to add support for a new site, or am I going to write a guide to put on our website? We usually decide we're going to work on adding support for a new site. But, like, for example, whitepages.com, they have a way to do a removal, and they act like if you go and do that removal, your profile will be gone and no one will be able to find it. But it's not actually true. They have separate phone records. So if someone searches for your phone number and then buys a report about your phone number, they can get all of your data, even though you might have opted yourself out of their site using their regular removal process.
And the regular
process causes your publicly accessible data on whitepages.com to go away. But if someone does a phone search and buys a report, you're still there. And like, we only know that because a customer emailed us about it at one point and told us. But since then, we've found, like, we verified it, it's true. We have to do extra phone searches and we have to email White Pages customer service in order to get them to remove those phone records that don't otherwise go away.
And do you offer that today as part of your service? Or is that something that's planned?
Yeah. That's built into our service.
Oh, great.
And there are a few other things like that. I don't remember them off the top of my head, where we do things beyond what's published anywhere publicly. And we're not trying to keep that a secret. We just haven't gotten around to publishing it. So we'd like to publish some more of that stuff. I mentioned marketing. We do want to scale up our marketing. A lot of why we run this business is because we really want removal from these sites to be accessible. Like, we're not happy that this data is out there. We know lots of people aren't, and we want more people to be able to do the removal. And most people are never going to spend the 20 hours it takes to do it pretty thoroughly. And most people are never going to spend like $100 or more to do it either. So I think if we can bring it to people who would be willing to spend $20, it's good for us, obviously, but I think it's good for the people who might want that also.
Definitely.
That's all that's coming to mind right now.
Honestly, this conversation's been great. I'd love to have you back. Anything you want to, any parting words, anything we haven't discussed?
Yeah, well, so we talked about data breaches earlier. I think I had a few more thoughts. Oh yeah, about the data breaches. This is not quite parting words, just another thought.
Yeah.
In terms of like what can be done to fix it, I feel like people are really bad at predicting catastrophes. So any discouragement that relies on penalties after the fact, I don't think is going to be very effective. It seems like there ought to be better standards and enforcement for how everything is handled all the time, rather than just like punitive things after a data breach happens. That, I think that would be essential, but we're nowhere near having the kind of regulations needed to do anything useful there, at least in the US.
Yeah.
And then another kind of similar thought about how the data brokers operate. There's very little enforcement for how opt-outs have to happen, or whether opt-outs even have to be offered. And like, for example, California has its privacy laws, of course. There's a new one going into effect in a couple of years that will require data brokers to standardize removals, but that's only California. I think we're a long way from all states having something like that, or something nationwide.
Yeah.
But as long as enforcement is as weak as it is, laws like that don't really help anything. Like, there is tons and tons of these data brokers that are breaking the rules of California's privacy laws, and there's nothing you can do about it except report it to the California Attorney General, or there's a new organization in the state responsible for handling complaints, and they have more resources than they used to, but those complaints almost never go anywhere historically. Maybe things will improve.
That's the problem. And if these data brokers are catching on to that, which I'm sure they have, then others will follow suit and think, oh, well, nothing's going to happen. So we'll stay quiet.
Yeah. And I think without standards for how they have to process the opt-outs, even if there is some enforcement, then they can just change what they do a little bit and wait for the next enforcement that may or may not ever come. And they can keep making things difficult for people.
Absolutely. Listen, this has been really good conversation. Maybe we can get yourself and Ben back in the future.
Yeah, I think we could do that in the future. That would be great.
That would be great. Well, listen, thanks so much for agreeing to coming on the show. I think 95% or more of the listeners will certainly appreciate it. And after this, I'm going to sign up myself. So I'll let you know how I get on.
All right, great. All right. Thank you for having me, Ray.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I found it very insightful and informative. Now, I don't have sponsors for this show. I don't have affiliate links or any kickback or any incentives at all, really, to have these conversations. I genuinely want to have conversations with people in the privacy community and the industry that supports it. If you have any suggestions for future guests, then feel free to let them know or let me know and we'll see what we can do. I've been promising for some time to talk about self-hosting, especially at home. I'm not talking about the cloud, but everything from using a desktop PC or a laptop to run Nextcloud, all the way through to a highly available server cluster. So that will be an interesting episode that I'm going to record soon, so look out for that one. But whatever you're doing, stay safe out there, stay private, and we'll talk soon.